For reaction, we have reached Paul Miller in Alexandria, Virginia. He served in Afghanistan as a military intelligence analyst with the U.S. Army, and he was an intelligence analyst with the CIA. And then he served as director for Afghanistan and Pakistan on the National Security Council staff. Welcome to you, Paul. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
All right. Now, as you heard, we know that the NATO Secretary General, in fact, held a news conference last hour. And part of his comments there is that we have seen in the last few weeks in Afghanistan a military and political collapse at a speed that was not foreseen. What's your assessment of those comments?
Well, I think that everyone understood that as the international community withdrew, the Taliban would make gains, because we understood that the Afghan army was not quite ready yet to stand on its own without international support, particularly without air support. The speed has been a little surprising. It seems evident that the Taliban have been able to bribe, bully, and negotiate their way into power without having to fight much. And I think that's because the morale of the Afghan army simply collapsed when they understood the international community was no longer going to support them. They made an individually rational decision to save their lives by not fighting a losing battle. And after having fought for 10 years, after having held the line and fought the Taliban for 10 years, 50,000 Afghan soldiers have been killed in combat against the Taliban. So I don't hold it against them that they understood they could no longer keep this fight up without our help.
And, you know, part of the remarks there from the NATO Secretary General was essentially saying that this is a failure of Afghan leadership that we're witnessing today. What do you make of that, putting the responsibility on the Afghan leadership at this stage?
I think there's blame enough to go around. Yes, the Afghan government has been corrupt and has spent too much time on its own internal factional squabbling over the years. But let's acknowledge that there's blame that lies with the international community, with all of the American administrations that have overseen the war effort, and indeed with our allies as well. We can spend quite a long time finger pointing. As they say, victory has 1,000 fathers, defeat is an orphan. So I think it is actually important for us to acknowledge our own role in the unfolding catastrophe there, and our own responsibility to try to make it right, at least by getting the Afghan refugees out.
So I'm sure you were watching the U.S. president's remarks yesterday in regards to this, an acknowledgement that the buck stops at the U.S. president, but essentially, again, not entirely taking responsibility for the chaos and the volatile situation that we're seeing unfold in that country. What was your reaction to the remarks that we saw from the U.S. president yesterday?
It seems to me that President Biden did a great job of accepting responsibility for the decision and no responsibility for the consequences. And I'm sorry, but he just can't have it both ways. He can't have his cake and eat it too. If he's going to own the decision, he owns the consequences, and that includes the scenes that unfolded in Kabul over the past few days, and it includes what's going to happen in Afghanistan in the coming months. We've already seen reports that the Taliban are going house by house, hunting for Afghan soldiers, human rights activists, religious minorities, and they are executing those who collaborated with the international coalition. And I think that President Biden has to own his role in allowing this catastrophe to unfold.
And you know, what you're describing seems very in contrast to the message that we appear to be getting from the Taliban, saying that they have declared an amnesty across Afghanistan and they're urging women to join the government. Do you believe that those sort of promises will be kept? Certainly, we've heard a lot about actions and words. Do you think there will be a reflection of the words we're seeing?
I think the Taliban are very good, better than they used to be at propaganda and spinning the international media. I think that for the next couple of months, they will give the right talking points to the international media, and they may try to appear moderate until the international spotlight is off of them. But you give it about 6 months or maybe a year, and I think the Taliban will show us their true colors, that they have not changed. They still have the same ideology, the same theology, and they will not respect women's rights. They will not respect religious freedom, and they are likely to at least tacitly allow the reestablishment of safe haven by international terrorist groups. I think the Taliban have not changed. We're going to see the same level of barbarism and tyranny that we saw 25 years ago.
And to that very point, again, we heard from the NATO Secretary General that they were concerned about international terrorism when it came to the Taliban taking over Afghanistan. What do you see on that front with the resurgence potentially of more terrorist activity?
Yes, as I just said, I do believe that international terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, perhaps the Pakistani Taliban and other groups will be able to establish at least a tacit safe haven. Perhaps the Taliban will ask these groups to be a little quieter than they were before 2001, so as not to bring down international isolation, sanctions, or airstrikes. But the safe haven will be there. You have to understand, the past 20 years, we haven't had a terrorist attack emanating from this region, in part because the militants were on the run. They were in hiding from our airstrikes and our special forces. Now they're not in hiding. Now they have space and time to breathe, space and time to plan, recruit, train, and fundraise. And that means every one of us, not just in the United States, but in Europe and across the world, are at heightened risk of international terrorist attacks again.
So as we continue to look forward then, as we watch all of this happen right now, and it is a different situation because we can watch it happen now. 20 years ago, we necessarily didn't have the technology, the capabilities, the resource to see this real-time images that we're seeing right now of what is happening in Afghanistan. What can we learn from what we're seeing and what we have experienced, what you've experienced in the past?
Well, I'm afraid that one of the lessons many people will claim we ought to learn is that we shouldn't try these kinds of interventions. I think that would be a tragedy if that's the lesson we try to learn from this. The next time there's a humanitarian catastrophe in the world, perhaps in North Korea or some other country in the world, if the international community does not intervene, it'll be those people suffering on the ground who pay the price of our failure in Afghanistan. I think that the lessons are different. I think if we choose to intervene, that we surge from day one, that we do not pretend to put deadlines or withdraw timetables on it, and that we listen to the leaders on the ground to what they need. We never actually resourced this mission at the level required for success. There are many lessons. We're going to be debating this for decades, but I'm afraid we may learn the wrong ones.
All right. Well, we very much appreciate your time and your insights on this important issue. Thank you so much, Paul. That is Paul Miller. He joined us from Alexandria, Virginia. Thank you.